Welcome to the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Since 2010, the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska has worked toward one goal, a food and water secure world. One in which global food security is ensured without compromising the use of water to meet other essential human and environmental needs. It's a daunting vision, but one that is vitally important. This podcast amplifies the voices of those making waves in this space. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hi, I'm Frances Hayes, DWFI Director of Communications and Public Relations, and your host for this episode of the Water for Food podcast. Today, I'm here at the beautiful Valmont Industries headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska, and joined by Darren Siekman. Darren is the Vice President of Policy and Industry Strategy at Valley Agriculture, which is a Valmont company. And Valmont is a global leader in providing innovative irrigation solutions. We'll be discussing the critical intersection of water and food security and how Valmont Industries and irrigation technology is an important part of the discussion. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about how you got here. You've been with Valmont for over a decade now, but you were previously with a company called DTN, which publishes Progressive Farmer Magazine, which our listeners may be familiar with. But tell me more about DTN and the role that you played there.
No, great. And thank you so much, Frances. It's great that to be invited onto this podcast, and it's always fun to share the message that we work on with DWFI. But as it relates to DTN, DTN stood for Data Transmission Network. And you have to remember, like back in the 90s or early 2000s, earlier we were talking about dial-up internet. You may not even have had dial-up internet. So what DTN did was via satellite brought agricultural news and commodity quotes and weather out to growers. So it really evened the playing field, because prior to that time, you'd have people in Chicago or Minneapolis trading futures, and a grower may not know what was going on in the market. So the cool part about DTN is we were able to get over 100,000 growers, most of them in the Corn Belt, but spread all throughout U.S. and Canada, with the ability to get real-time market information, really for the first time ever at an affordable price. So now, with whether it's ubiquitous broadband or 5G, we all have that in our phones and we take it for granted. But at the time, it was really revolutionary. And the thing that DTN taught me, though, was even though I grew up with an ag background, it really opened my eyes to that how little I knew about agriculture. So it was fun to listen to your customers because, for instance, one of their favorite things was a wind speed map. Because again, unless I had a functioning weather station, I didn't know if it was okay to spray or not. Or even if I did spray, I wanted a proof that, hey, there's not going to be drift today. So there's just little things like that we didn't think of that the growers brought to us that really made it a great product. And then, as you said, it really became more of a multimedia company and still continuing today.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like you have quite a background in data and information and gotten to see kind of how everything has evolved to where we are now, where you can just get online and find a lot of that information.
Absolutely. It was really fun to bring technology to growers and agribusinesses. And so I had several different jobs there, but I was fortunate enough to wind up as leading our whole agricultural division before I left. So evening that playing field and bringing technology solutions that paid off for the grower was what really drove that business.
And probably really applicable to what you do now, which I want to talk about next, which is your role here at Valmont and what excites you about your position and what you do. And I know you've traveled some with our colleagues at Water for Food, and so that's exciting that Valmont provides those opportunities as well. So tell me a little bit about what you do here and what your day looks like.
Thank you. I'm going to back you up a little bit, though, because growing up, again, I grew up 2 hours west of here in Merritt County, Nebraska, and a Valley Center pivot was like right up there with the John Deere tractors, like you've reached the pinnacle of agricultural production, especially this was in the 80s, right? So I was fortunate enough to grow up. My dad was a county extension agent, and we did a lot of early irrigation scheduling research. So I remember going out as a kid and helping put in either an old-fashioned gypsum moisture blocks before we even had potentiometers, i.e. soil moisture probes. And I got to grow up not just doing that, but then working for the growers a lot of my neighbors, because at the time, irrigation, maybe a very well-to-do farmer had a center pivot, but we were pulling a lot of ditches and setting siphon tubes, and we were still laying pipe and doing a lot of gravity-fed irrigation. So when I got to come to Valmont, it was one of those things where it's really an aspirational company, and not just that we're headquartered here in Nebraska, but it's really, we are the market leader all across the globe. And if you're in the irrigation space, it's so exciting to get to work here. But now to really answer your question, sorry, I won't drone on all day. We are a global company, so I've been fortunate enough that in my role, you could maybe also call it business development. And so I've gotten to do a lot of acquisitions, a lot of partnerships, work on special projects. And I've gotten to set foot on every continent except Antarctica. So for somebody from central Nebraska, I never would have dreamt that I would be in the south of Egypt or almost to the Sudanese border or in the middle of Brazil or in the middle of Central Asia getting to work on irrigation projects. So that's what I do day in and day out. Is I also have a small business we have that's really putting together all of the what we call an ancillary. So obviously Valley or Valmont Industries manufactures the center pivot, but we have to get the water there, and we don't manufacture a lot of that, but it does require engineering and planning. And so the group that I get to lead is really all around delivering the water to the pivot. In some cases, again, this is one of those things I learned after I got here. I grew up, you dig a post hole and water comes out, right? We're right on top of the aquifer with a really high water table. But in most cases, in a lot of these really large projects, we're piping water, tens of miles or more, and it's a very complicated scenario to get water, especially surface water, either out of a river or out of some sort of retention pond to get there. So my day is very varied, and I like that. So I'm very, very fortunate that my day is literally I get to talk to you today. Earlier today, I was talking to people in Israel. I'll talk to people in Brazil later today. And again, all about large projects we're doing, opportunities that we have to try to bring on new products to the market.
Great. Well, I expect to see center pivots in Antarctica at some point, so you can cross that last one off your list. So I want to talk a little bit more about the relationship with Valley Ag and Valmont. You kind of mentioned that Valley Ag is kind of the producer of the center pivots, but what's that relationship, and then also how does it work within the Valley Industries strategy?
Sure. The easiest thing is Valmont Industries is our parent company. So Mr. Doherty, founded Valmont, and obviously we're talking about the Doherty Water for Food Institute. So that was Valmont Industries is the parent company. It's publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. You can go look up all kinds of stuff about it and about us. But the fun part is that, again, if you're a Nebraskan, this makes perfect sense. But it's absolutely our main production facility for the United States for irrigation is in Valley, Nebraska. Well, just down the road, about 15 or 20 miles, there's a town called Fremont, Nebraska, and a lot of our workers still live there and come from there. So hence you put Valley and Fremont together and you get Valmont. But so Valley's really our go-to-market for our center pivots, and it's the go-to-market brand. So we have two divisions. Our agricultural division that's really about mechanized irrigation, and then the other division of Valmont is infrastructure, and that's anything from a large utility pole to cell phone towers to do build-outs, and then also the coatings, because again, we want to make sure that steel, most of our products are all steel, and so we cover those with zinc, or i.e. hot dip galvanizing, if you're familiar with that, and that's how we go to market, is really under those two. So underneath the ag and the infrastructure umbrella.
Interesting. So you use some of the technology and pieces from the irrigation side and use it for other purposes.
For those of us on the irrigation side, we like to say, again, you know what a center pivot looks like. It's this long steel tube. Well, if you stand it up, it becomes a light pole. And in the early days, because we were just working in the U.S. market, the two original buildings in Valley they had the center pivot line, and then they had their pole line. And when things would slow down in the summer, because we weren't shipping to South America, we were shipping around the world, folks would walk across the street or walk across the lane and start making light poles. And then if you think about, like I just said, we want to protect it from the environment. Well, we need to be able to hot dip galvanize it. That's the most environmentally friendly and robust way to protect steel. So that's how we got into our businesses. So the center pivot really started the whole company.
So Valmont's known for its irrigation solutions, but it actually got its start, I've learned, when the founder, Robert B. Doherty, who also founded our institute, the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute, but it started when he sold crop elevators.
In the Sears Roebuck catalog, if anybody on our that's listening remembers what a Sears Roebuck catalog was.
Wow. You could buy a crop elevator in that catalog. That's interesting.
Yes.
Wow, how times have changed.
You could even buy chicks. You could buy houses. If you go back, again, that'll be a fun Google exercise for any of our young listeners, is think of all the things you could buy via Sears catalog. And you could literally, there's Sears homes. My grandparents moved into Sears home to their farm south of Fairbury, Nebraska.
Wow. It's like the Amazon from...
It was the Amazon of the day, only it showed up in a big, thick book that was used for a multitude of things, but we digress. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I was just wondering if you can tell us why center pivot irrigation is now so important to agriculture, particularly in Nebraska, where we see when we fly in a plane, we see the circles from the center pivots and how they address the challenges of water security, which is one of our institute's missions.
So just yesterday, we were listening to some analysts from Bloomberg, and so Valley and Valmont Industries is just a little over 80 years old. If you go back and look back 75 years in the United States, and I'm just talking about U.S. agriculture, we have tripled our output using 2% less inputs, 15% less capital, 28% less land, and more importantly, 76% less labor. So hence earlier when I was talking about you had teenagers hauling around gated pipe, you had teenagers setting siphon tubes and digging holes, or you even think about the size of our equipment. So what the center pivot has been is a huge piece of productivity. Again, most of our listeners are going to know about or have read about the Green Revolution, so I'm not going to underestimate. Again, there's been a whole bunch of technology increases, right? I mean, we're fertilizing better. We've developed hybrid seeds. But absolutely, irrigation, the utilization of irrigation, and now mechanized irrigation has made a very, very efficient way to improve the productivity of the land. And when you think about Nebraska, and that's what even, we sit here in eastern Nebraska, and in my hometown, or if you get very far west, it's not a question of you irrigate, right? Around this part of Nebraska and even in Iowa, and that's it. Okay, I'll still probably grow a crop. But if you get very far west of here, 2 or 3 hours, if you don't irrigate, chances are you will not grow a crop. Or it will be those crops of, again, it's always easy to use corn as a benchmark, the 50 bushels to the acre instead of 250. So the fact that we're on a productivity journey, and we need to take that productivity journey around the world, in my opinion, and again, just to better utilize our resources. Because I forgot to give you the plug that Valley or Valmont's corporate tagline is conserving resources and improving life. And really the center pivot does that. And we probably don't spend as much time on some of our environmental missions because we are, in my opinion, for a whole 80-year time frame, have been wonderful stewards of water scarcity. And I'll stop there before I keep droning on.
No, it's all very interesting. So beyond irrigation, are there other strategies that Valmont employs to promote sustainable agriculture and food security? Or are there ways that our listeners might not think of that's done through irrigation or center pivots?
Right. So I think probably the easiest example is the fact that now we're utilizing a lot more technology around that. And so, yes, you can say, well, that's part of irrigation. Okay, I have remote control on the machine. But as we do variable rate seeding, as we do variable rate fertilization, and we can do variable rate irrigation right along with that, or the fact that now, because you can provide uniform irrigation, it's much easier for the grower to utilize some of those variable rate technologies across that. So that's really probably the best example we have. I would say the other thing, though, is that we very much have that sustainability mission, i.e. that's why I wanted to mention that, we are at our heart really a steel fabricator. Steel is the most recycled product on earth. We want to coat it in zinc so we keep the longevity up. And that's not sustainable agriculture, but it's definitely wanting to be, a good steward of the environment besides delivering the value for the grower and for the end user.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense that, now it's probably the focus is equally on the technology that goes with the hardware, for lack of a better term.
And it's really become table stakes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really a requirement. So we push very hard, and we actually make sure that when our machines leave the factory, they're fully, technologically enabled. We go to market through almost 600 dealers around the world, about 250 here in the U.S., and we have certified technology advisors. So our dealers have employees that have taken the classes and know how to maximize that return. Because the other thing is, let's face it, it's not economically sound either. And that's what, again, I bet our listeners know, but when we talk to the general public, a grower doesn't want to be, he wants to protect the environment because he wants to hand his operation down to the next generation. But B, if you're pumping too much water or putting too much fertilizer down, it costs you money and it hurts your profitability. And now more than ever, at least when we're thinking about, maize or corn prices and soy prices here in the U.S., every penny counts. So we're part of that solution for the grower.
We obviously love our center pivots here in Nebraska, and we have lots of them. But Valmont also has a very global presence, which you have a part of. Can you share Valmont's other geographical areas of focus, how you collaborate with farmers and stakeholders there that might be different than here, just to ensure that the solutions are tailored to their needs, especially in new markets? Maybe it's not that they're growing corn or soybeans, maybe they're growing something else. They have different growing seasons, maybe multiple. Talk a little bit about that.
So the ones that kind of look the most like the U.S. is I've already mentioned Brazil or South America, so Brazil and Argentina. And that's really a productivity journey. And what I mean by that is that there's been a lot of negative talk, and again with deforestation or things that are happening in Brazil. But in Brazil, we're able to really drive land productivity. And what I mean by that is we ensure that a farmer can maybe get a more productive second crop, and depend upon where they're at in the country, they may actually get the third crop. And without irrigation, because there's a very wet season and a dry season, our center pivots really even that out. But that's mostly for, as you said, corn and soy production. So then we'll maybe spin around to the other side of the globe, and it's primarily all across the Middle East, but the project I've gotten to be most personally involved in is one in southern Egypt, and we've installed over 3,000 center pivots, and they're growing wheat, and that's completely a food security journey. And what I mean by that is that, first there is the pandemic that was disrupting shipping lanes, and then unfortunately we have the unrest between Ukraine and Russia. And so again, as a country that was importing over 90 to 95% of their wheat, we are working with the Egyptian government. So again, that's a different kind of relationship. We're pretty good at grower relationships, or more importantly, our dealer is. But now when we're dealing with some of those large governments and some of those larger entities, it requires more of an educational journey. And what I mean by that is not just the benefit, but more importantly, the operation. So it's very important to have people on the ground, the proverbial boots on the ground, to really show folks how to maximize that. And it's as simple as you need to build up your soil before you can really intensively go grow grain, things like that.
So definitely expands beyond just the irrigation side of things, getting the land ready for the irrigation and all the other parts and pieces that go with that.
And then, as I mentioned before, this is water coming out of the River Nile, and so it's moving, tens if not hundreds of miles. And again, we haven't been we did not build those, but obviously we have to provide the specifications and say, hey, this is how much water you need, and this is how many acres you want to bring, or hectares in this case, into production.
Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the relationship with Valmont and our institute, the Water for Food Global Institute, not just through Robert B. Doherty's founding of the institute, but we've worked on lots of projects in current day. And so I wanted you to provide some examples of those projects or initiatives in which Valmont's expertise in irrigation technology has complemented the Institute's research and policy work.
So there's several, and I'll try to be brief, but I don't want to skimp any, because I think that's one of those things that even if you ask someone walking through the halls here, they may not know about. So we've had several cases of policy work, and what I mean by that is when we were doing a project in Central Asia, the foundation came in and really and did a study of here's like best practices for building national policy. And again, unfortunately, we actually had a brief engagement in the Ukraine with the Institute as well, with that idea that, okay, we're trying to revitalize our water infrastructure. How do we make that work? The ones that maybe have more success is, again, as a native Nebraskan, I'll wave our flag, that I've lost count thanks to your staff, but I know we've had at least 6, if not 7 delegations from various parts of South America, mostly Brazil, but also Argentina, because they know that we have managed our water resources so well here. So again, I understand that maybe my dad now is a retired, he's still a farmer, maybe might not like all the rules that his local NRD has put down, or he doesn't like this or doesn't like that. But when you think of not just whether it's our NRDs, which i.e. are local governance, as well as with the great intersection we have of education and technology, Nebraska is really a bellwether for people around the globe as they try to bring on irrigation and as they try to better manage their water resources. So that's been really cool. So we've gotten to do that. And then last but not least, we got to go to World Water Week. I'd never been to World Water Week before, so I was very honored to get to sit on a panel with your colleagues from the Institute. And we're planning a similar event. There's a climate meeting called COP, and it will be in Brazil next year, and we're going to do some joint meetings there as well. So it's one of those things where there's a lot of synergy, and there's a lot of times that we work together, and we probably need to do a better job of saying, hey, here's the projects we've done together. But again, really appreciate all of the global emphasis and the work across all of the commercial work that DWFI has done. Because I know it's tough to bridge that divide between pure research and then you get us or our friendly competitors down the street or people that are currently trying to do commercial projects as well. So I think the Institute's done a great job of balancing that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that the Institute realizes the importance of, but also prides itself on, is being able to kind of take those research projects and bring them into practice through private industry connections to make sure that they're actually a viable solution and that they'll work in the real world. Because sometimes research can just kind of stay in academia and not get used. And then what's the point?
It's not dissimilar from technology, though.
Yeah.
We talk about that with commercialization of technology. I mean, there's this valley of death or the trough that you must go through, that there's all these great ideas, but how do we make sure that they really pay off for the grower?
So what are some of the biggest challenges that you see in achieving global food security, and how can the technology and innovation play a role in overcoming these challenges? I know you talked about it a little bit, but if you could expand on that.
Well, I'm going to give you an anecdote. I just read an article over the weekend, and now it makes perfect sense to me. And it was about dairy cows. And so here in the U.S., our average dairy cow produces about 30 liters of milk every day. In Africa, it's only 1.6 liters. And obviously, a dairy cow here is going to be climate controlled, and we take care of them. But sometimes it comes down to the simplest things. And the simplest thing was where they were doing some of these pilot projects, and it happened to be Kenya. How do you measure a feedlot, or how do you measure, well, I have this many head? It was no different for that farmer in Kenya. He wanted to have 10 or 20 cows. Well, that was great, except that because of the lack of technology and the lack of fodder and the lack of foodstuffs, he really only had enough feed to support about 3 cows. And so, but that's his sense of worth. The more cows I have, the more prosperous I appear in the community and the more respect I have in the community. So in this case, it was as simple as, hey, you can really feed this many cows, and now he's getting more milk with 6 cows than he had with 20. I get excited about technology. So I'm like, how can we grow more alfalfa for him? Or how can we bring in some grass that can maybe do better? And how do we teach him to do some basic mechanized irrigation, which is an exciting project that the Institute recently took on with USAID. But, sometimes it's back to the basics. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge we have. Is have we gone back to the basics before we try to teach college level math or differential calculus? Did we go back to the basics and say, do we really know what we're dealing with? So that's the one. And then more probably on point to your question is it's always about distribution, right? I mean, I think we all know that plenty of calories are grown, but we don't get them distributed and consumed. That's a big challenge. And the only thing I can say there is that the more we can localize, whether that's through, again, hopefully mechanized irrigation, but again, just making our local growers more prosperous and more productive, that really starts to make you more food secure than at that point. So you don't have to worry about shipping so much all the way around the world.
So looking ahead, what are Valmont's priorities in terms of water and food security? What new products and innovations can we expect to see from the company? What's your big focus that everyone's rallying around?
Really, this between a little bit of this economic downturn in the U.S. For the ag market anyway, it's really getting us back to focusing on what brought us here, i.e. the center pivot, because it's and again, there's lots of cool stuff and there's all these great technologies out there, but the center pivot's the only thing that's in the field all day, every day, all year round. So it's really about how can we pull more data off of that and be able to then let the grower make better production decisions or just do a better job of analyzing the data as well. So it's really it's really focusing on our core. And what we do really well is we do water and we do mechanized irrigation very well. So that's really what we're thinking about is how are we better stewards and how do we provide better efficiency and productivity for our growers around that water space. And that's as simple, and again, it's as simple as, hey, we can now predict whether that be via some thermal imaging or whether it be via like a runtime monitor, you need to go out and get a new sprinkler package on. Or you've got a sprinkler that's plugged and it's if we wait till the naked eye to see it, it's going to be too late for the crop. So sometimes it's very, very sophisticated solutions to give us just a better advance on pretty simple things.
That's all I have for us today, but I wanted to give you the opportunity, if there's anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to discuss, any parting words for our audience? Well,
I just think, again, despite some of these short-term challenges we have, is that, this is still a great time to be in agriculture. We are so blessed to have the resources we have here. And as I've gotten to go around the world, I find that, again, it's super lucky because the languages may not sound the same, but when you think about what our growers are trying to do around the world, it's very, very similar. So that's been, for me personally, that's been very rewarding, and I'm just happy that we have the relationship we do with DWFI and that, I'm able to be a small piece of what the Valley's success.
I think it's great to have partners like Valmont so close that we can just drive here in an hour and get to meet with you, and also the involvement with Valmont in our upcoming global conference and delegations that come to visit. I think having multiple perspectives from Valmont's side and the Institute's side is great to give everyone a holistic picture of what those solutions might look like. So thanks for sharing your insights on the crucial role of water in food security and the innovative solutions that Valmont Industries is developing. I really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise today. So that concludes this episode of the Water for Food podcast. Join us next time for another insightful conversation on the critical issues of water and food security.
Thanks for joining us this time on the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Make sure to visit our website, waterforfood.nebraska.edu, to view show notes or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.